more U.S. forces are heading to the region. Secretary of State Rubio is saying today, as all of this is being absorbed around the world, that he views the next stage of the operation as something that will be more intense. That's the wording from the Trump administration. We'll be following the facts. The State Department is urging U.S. nationals to leave 14 different countries in the region, citing safety risks. We have pictures out of Tehran, Iran today. American and Israeli strikes have targeted key facilities. You can see some of the fallout and smoke. Central Command, U.S. planes, we can report, were shot down. This was by friendly fire over Kuwait. Some footage shows a jet going down. The pilot was able to safely eject. U.S. military officials say all 6 crew members impacted, as you see there, by those jet shootings, they all were able to survive. Iran launched drone attacks early this morning on oil refineries in Saudi Arabia. The U.S. and Israel have struck more than 2,000 targets in Iran. I repeat, 2,000 targets. That is the scale of this attack. Obviously, a ton of attention rightfully focused on the initial successful hit that took out the Iranian supreme leader. But this is a wider set of attacks. That's according to military officials. And even if it is at this point an air war, it is war. Iran swiftly retaliating. They've hit locations in multiple countries: Jordan, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, and the UAE. 6 Americans are now dead, according to the Pentagon. Iran's state media says they believe the death toll in their country, according to their public estimates, is over 500. That includes 165 related to a girls' school that was hit. That is just what we know in something that has unfolded as initially the Saturday morning surprise attack. Where we go from here is a lot of open questions. That's really the only way to put it, because sometimes when you cover war, you have the different dueling statements from governments. One says it'll be like this, and the other says it'll be like that. It's important to understand that while the president has exerted himself in his own unusual ways with a video and some posts on the social media site that he owns, this is unlike any communication we have seen from a modern president about any war actions of this scale. And so we can't really tell you what the plan is from the United States in one voice, nor even what the objective is. If that sounds like criticism, well, that would mean that it sounds bad. But that's, of course, in the eye of the beholder. Donald Trump argues that this is a type of flexibility and a new approach to war. But let me show you the range of things that we're following. Trump has put forward, according to nonpartisan accounts, shifting and whiplash-inducing inconsistent explanations or justifications for what we're doing right now in a war that has touched down, as I just showed you, in over 5 countries when it comes to the attacks and counterattacks. And that's just how the Wall Street Journal boiled it down, a newspaper, of course, owned by Rupert Murdoch, the sister outlet of Fox News. The administration has at times asserted that the goal might be, 1, destroying Iran's nuclear program. It has also said in recent times, within the last 6 months, that said nuclear program was already, quote, obliterated. There's also been a discussion of 2, thwarting Iran's ballistic missile threat. Pentagon assessments say that currently Iran cannot strike the United States with ballistic missiles. There's also been, by the president himself, 3, the talk of regime change and some sort of popular uprising. Donald Trump, in the few remarks he did make to the public, there hasn't been yet an address to the nation, let alone Congress, but in his recorded video, he talked about Iranians, quote, taking their country. Trump has also, within the days since Saturday morning's address, really backed off that statement, because that would sound like trying to coordinate a popular uprising in this country to get regime change. His Secretary of Defense, now Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, says this.
This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change.
Fact check, false. We do not have evidence of a popular uprising that has changed or replaced the regime of Iran. You can contrast that to recent examples people know. When the Syrian government fell, its leader left the country, and the governing leadership of that country completely changed. Here, at least as of this hour, while there is instability in Iran, huge questions about what comes next, who may actually emerge as the long-term leader, the same regime is in place. Now, the president has talked about avoiding deploying American ground troops to Iran or the region. Over the weekend, he said to the outlet Axios, this war might end, conceivably, in, quote, 2 or 3 days. He also stated it could go 4 to 5 weeks. And he also stated it could go, quote, far longer.
Whatever the time is, it's okay. Whatever it takes, we will always, and we have right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that.
There is not a consistent, asserted foreign policy goal here, let alone some wider doctrine. There is not a clear representation to the American public what the one or more objectives are. And that's important because, as just about everyone remembers from the United States' last operations in the Middle East, without a clear objective for what you're trying to do and when it's over, it can take a very long time. I want to bring in experts who have lived through and been practitioners in this type of foreign policy and military policy for the better part of a generation. General Barry McCaffrey, retired 4-star general, MS Now analyst, who was part of our breaking coverage as soon as all of our colleagues were reporting this here and abroad on Saturday. And Ambassador Dennis Ross, a widely renowned Middle East expert. He served as a diplomat and a peace negotiator in all of the top administrations of both parties, basically prior to the Trump era, Clinton, Bush, and Obama. Welcome to you both. General McCaffrey, I want to just give you the floor. I showed some of what we're hearing from the United States government, which has been at times clearly inconsistent. But compared to where we started Saturday morning, first tell us what you're seeing out there. What is the state of play militarily?
Well, you can't get beyond starting with an assessment that this is a terrible political mess. The president is ruling by decree. It's policy by whim. He made no effort to go out and gain the legitimate support of the American people. We have no allies essentially in this fight, not just the European NATO allies, but also the Gulf region. And finally, Congress has been completely left out of the loop. He, at the final moments, informed the gang, so-called Gang of Eight, what was going on, but there was literally no attempt to gain legitimacy from the U.S. Congress. From a strictly military point of view, operationally, the war is going quite well. Iran is in a very bad situation, not just in the general sense that they just finished murdering as many as 30,000 of their own citizens. They're widely despised. They're in economic collapse. They have lost much of their senior leadership. The war is going quite well. Iran is in a very bad situation, not just in the general sense that they just finished murdering as many as 30,000 of their own citizens. They're widely despised. They're in economic collapse. They have lost much of their senior leadership, some of it for the second time in 8 or 9 months. And we've hit, as you reported, literally hundreds of targets throughout the country. U.S. air power has dominance over Iran. We can fly where we want and attack what we want with relatively little risk. Now, the bad news for Iran is even further. They've alienated all the Gulf Coast states by attacking them from the air. And we're also seeing, I think, a decrease in their ability to even fight. They've lost a good bit of their Gulf Navy now. 7 major ships they have been sunk. So operationally, it's pretty good. Where's it all going to go? Nobody knows. I think that this war's got a month to run at most. It's politically a disaster.
Why at most, in your view?
I think the Iranians, we're going to run out of targets for starters. Now, what we're hopeful now, I think, is to get a political negotiation that will have the Iranians let inspectors back in on the ground. And in terms of regime change, which can't be done from the air, there may be some effort, covert or international, to get a fracture in the security forces. The RGC are going to stay brutally engaged in support of the leadership. And they're also a corrupt giant business. And
the Trump administration do on matters small and domestic also is playing out here on the grand theater of Mideast multi-country airstrike war, which is the president says things and posts things, and then other people come along and try to make the best of it, clean it up, narrow it. And again, I'm not speaking critically, I'm just reporting what we've observed, sort of say, well, he didn't mean that, and we're only doing this. So here's how Rubio tried to, I believe, narrow some of the many things Trump has already said. Take a listen.
I don't understand what the confusion is. Let me explain it to you, and I'll do it once again as clearly as possible. Perhaps you'll report it that way. The United States is conducting an operation to eliminate the threat of Iran's short-range ballistic missiles and the threat posed by their Navy, particularly to naval assets.
Ambassador?
Well, excuse me, that's the first I've heard that those are our objectives. Those objectives are quite narrowly stated, the Navy and the short-range ballistic missiles. By the way, short-range ballistic missiles threaten our Gulf partners. That's, by the way, not the concern of the Israelis. The Israelis were the medium-range ballistic missiles. So he's introducing what is a very narrow set of objectives. By the way, if those are the objectives, what Barry was just saying, we'll achieve those objectives this week. So if that's all we're talking about, then you obviously are going to be able to curtail this sooner rather than later. I would say, just as a general observation, I think the objectives of the administration are not regime change, they're regime weakening. And they are a combination of regime weakening on the one hand, and on the other, destroying to the extent we can the Iranian ability to threaten their neighbors, whether it's their immediate neighbors or it's Israel. That's the essence of what our objective seems to be. The idea of, we're creating a possibility for the Iranian public. Here's their chance. If they succeed, great. If they don't, well, that was their problem. The problem with such an approach is, and Barry was getting at this, there's 150,000 IRGC. There's 200,000 Basij. Now, it is true that we and the Israelis are hitting their headquarters, both central headquarters, regional headquarters, some of the provincial headquarters, and we're disrupting their command control. And maybe that is weakening them, but the most it might be doing is disrupting them to the point where maybe there could be some defections. Barry made a reference to the fact maybe the military, which is separate from the Basij and the IRGC, would see that ultimately their role is to protect the Iranian public. That would be desirable. We have no way of knowing if that's going to be the case. But regime weakening means maybe they're less a threat to their own population. That remains to be seen. But certainly they become much less of a threat within the region.
General, how do you view that? And this idea of constraining Iran as a threat means facing how Iran is both a state actor with all of those powers and the military figures mentioned, and one of the greatest sponsors of non-state terror, mostly against our allies, not against us. I mean, by Donald Trump's original policy of no more forever wars, you don't want to do big regional war to stop the non-state actors, whether that's Hezbollah or whomever, if it doesn't have a direct impact on U.S. security interests. So how do you assess that or critique that, given the shifting objectives we're hearing?
Well, I clearly support Ambassador Ross's assessment of the situation. it's such a mess. It's hard to coherently respond to some of these questions. It is clear to me that at the end of the day, what Trump actually is trying to do is to delay the nuclear program. I applaud that. I think he was getting nowhere in negotiations. He thinks that a massive air attack on Iran may well bring them back to the table with a more realistic assessment. Since we've killed a bunch of their political and military leadership, including the Ayatollah himself, it's hard to know how that will play out, but it's possible, in which case I would say we've achieved an adequate goal. But in the meantime, what we're seeing is really a lack of clarity on the part of the administration. I don't think they actually know what they're up to, except the military is running a splendid campaign in coordination with the Israelis. This is remarkable. Thousands of sorties, and we've only lost 3 aircraft that we know of, and those are friendly fire. So we have...
And I imagine you would relatedly say it's also been effective use of intelligence.
Oh, yeah. That's amazing. I mean, half the country of Iran isn't Persian. So the Israelis have penetrated them at will. It's astonishing what they got away with. And then our technical intelligence, as Ambassador Ross knows, is simply unbelievable for us to be able to identify 3 concentrations of senior leadership at hour 1 of the war. But again, I think there's a lot of thrashing around. This is a giant, sophisticated country, 90 million people, giant landmass, by and large despised by all and feared by all of its neighbors, all of whom secretly are applauding this ongoing military operation. But I think the president's got a limited amount of time, and so does the U.S. military. You know, we got a shortage of THAAD Patriot missiles, Navy SM-3s, Tomahawks. We got to keep a deterrence effort going in the Pacific Rim against China and also in Europe. So I don't anticipate this is going to be a long war, nor do I see anyone stupid enough to try and get U.S. or Israeli forces on the ground to dominate the country. They're going to sort this out on their own.
Really all important details for us as we, again, the country's still making sense of the surprise attack from Saturday. I want to thank General McCaffrey, who was a big part of our coverage, and we'll be coming back to you. Ambassador Ross, I have some diplomacy to get to with you in a moment. I'll tell folks that the MAGA base, the independents, a lot of folks are mad because Donald Trump has clearly broken one of his core vows, which is not starting wars like this. Senator Dick Durbin is here, a very pivotal member of Congress who's going to join us on some of these questions. This break is the shortest of the hour. I'll see you in 90 seconds.
I heard the question about 4 weeks. It's the typical NBC sort of gotcha type question. President Trump has all the latitude in the world to talk about how long it may or may not take. 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 6 weeks. It could move up. It could move back.
Secretary Hegseth today pushing back on questions about the timeline. We're back with longtime Middle East expert and diplomat Ambassador Dennis Ross. When you look at the diplomatic piece of this, which would involve some non-war long-term plan, how should we understand that in the history of U.S. dealings with Iran? There were periods where there was, of course, no talk. There was the Obama effort to have both diplomacy and it backed on the ground with inspection-type dealings. And there is what we were just discussing, but only briefly with you and the general about, well, yeah, if you use enough force in the right way to change reality, you might then get a weakened opponent that adheres to diplomacy they otherwise would not. That's the best hawkish case. Can you speak to us about that in plain English with regard to where we've been with Iran? Because folks remember President Obama saying, yeah, if we can get to X, then we'll call that a good enough holding pattern.
I think the way you just described it is actually quite good. What the JCPOA was an agreement that bought you with the JCPOA were not that it bought you 15 years. The problem I had is I didn't see a strategy to take advantage of those 15 years. The 15 years bought you time to do something much more fundamental. The Iranians were not giving up the right to enrich. On the contrary, they were going to be enriching. even more, after 15 years, there were no limits whatsoever on the scale or size of their program. There were no limits as to how much they could enrich. So what you really had to do was work out a JCPOA-2 to build on that, to really shape differently their approach to the whole question of their nuclear enrichment, but also ensuring they couldn't have nuclear weapons. When President Trump says, I want them to say we won't have nuclear weapons, it's easy for them to say they won't have nuclear weapons. The question becomes, what kind of a nuclear infrastructure are they permitted to have? And they're right to say zero enrichment is the best way to ensure that if they're not able to create their own enrichment, and when you enrich, you do one of two things with it. You can turn it into a fuel to power a nuclear reactor to create electricity, or you can turn it into a core of a bomb. The problem with independent enrichment is unless you have complete controls over this, and unless you can ensure it's never enriched above a low level, anything above 20% is considered highly enriched uranium, then you run the risk that they can have a covert program, they could do something you wouldn't be aware of, and that's what you want to be able to rule out. Now, the question you're posing about where we are today, I don't know who we would negotiate with right now. I mean, is there someone in this regime who, A, can speak for the regime, which is unclear, but if there is someone in the regime who can speak for the regime, could they feel, okay, the consequences of this war, if it continues, will threaten the regime? It is true, we can weaken them to the point where they become so weak that they really can't withstand, because maybe you see all sorts of defections within the besieged and the Revolutionary Guard to save themselves, to save the regime. If there's that sense that they are getting to the point where they're weak enough, and you have someone who can speak for the regime, and they pass a message, my view has been, I can see Putin coming in because they have a relationship with him. He would want to show his relevance, and he also wants to show Trump how he can give him a way out, and then have Trump reward him with his posture on Ukraine. I could see him coming in and saying, look, there's no way I can go to Trump unless you agree that you'll have zero enrichment. I'm ready to go to him, but you got to give me that. You got to give me that in my pocket. Now, if that happens, then you have a basis on which to deal with the nuclear program in perpetuity.
And to distill, I'm only jumping in to distill it. Is it too much a simplification to say that this current Trump policy is risky to the point of reckless in the views of its critics, but there is a non-zero chance that it lands with something that the Obama administration would have cheered, that other Western allies welcome, that it could eventually land with they're weak and scared, and you've got more people in those layers of leadership in Iran worried about their own survival than what was the goal of the prior thinking, which was to continue to be bellicose, both because it was part of their theocracy, but also because they viewed it as a position of strength.
Absolutely. Plus, Supreme Leader's gone. And emotionally, ideologically, he couldn't handle this. This would be too much of a capitulation. It would be too much of a defeat of the ideology. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people in the regime who reflect that. There are. But there may now be others who say, you know what, the whole hassle is going to come collapsing on us. What's different today than when President Obama was negotiating was the Iranians had some signs of weaknesses for sure, but nothing like today internally. You go back from 2017 until today, almost on an annual basis, we have seen demonstrations and protests.
Yeah.
After the Women Life Freedom, the killing of Mahsa Amini, after that, the whole social base of this regime was eroded because the strength of this regime politically lied in the countryside, where they were socially, religiously conservative. They've lost that. They had lost the urban areas already. Now they've lost.
So let me ask you one more, because we benefit from your wisdom, and I'm running out of time. What portion of that shift that you're describing, and that is a weak Iran that might be pliant for external goals, unless you push it so hard that you cut the head off the snake and you have 3 snakes and it's the worst outcome, which is also possible. But what portion of that is for those internal reasons you're mentioning, including of course the protests we've all seen, and what portion is what Israel has done post-October 7th, which is fight a different kind of regional war, dealing with Iran's proxies, and, of course, the unrest in Syria. What part of it is the chessboard finally changing?
It's a combination of both. The question is exactly right. It's a combination of both. Because what feeds the disaffection on the inside, even within parts of the regime, is a sense that you had a strategy that completely failed. You invested huge amounts in a regional proxy network that completely was washed away. The Israelis basically dramatically weakened that proxy network to the point where have they been when Iran was being attacked? Nowhere. So a huge investment.
Which is funny, and then I'm going to really give you the last word. Nothing's funny about it. It's all very serious with lives lost. But the old fear, which was sometimes expressed by American doves, was be careful. You rattle Iran, and they unleash these other folks that are all over, and like it or not, you have to deal with it. And it seems that that is less true today, those terrorist groups.
Look, one of the realities is those, quote, American doves had the sense that you could never use military force for any favorable positive effect. And you basically had to find ways to accommodate the Iranians and their regional proxy network. That proved to be wrong. It proved that, in fact, these were highly defeatable, not particularly effective, in the end, lacking any real legitimacy where they were. And Iran, the sort of mothership of all this, also was much weaker than was understood. This notion that you could never attack Iran directly because the sky would fall. Well, one of the things we found was that when they lost their sense of impunity, we saw how weak they fundamentally were.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm over on time, but some people say you are one of those American doves, even if you might be more hard-headed about the details. I don't know if that's a fair assessment or not.
Well, look, do I believe that you use diplomacy? Yes. Do I believe you can use diplomacy to achieve objectives? Absolutely. But I always believe that diplomacy works best when you have real leverage. And real leverage sometimes comes with coercive backing. The idea that you can negotiate without leverage is an illusion.
Yeah, okay. We went long for good reason. Ambassador Dennis Ross, a longtime peace negotiator and expert here in these tough times. That's why we call on you. Thank you. I'm going to tell folks coming up, we have a fact check on the shifting rationales and Senator Durbin next. We are back with Senator Dick Durbin, senior Democrat, member of the Appropriations Committee. He's the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. And in contrast to much of the Democratic Senate leadership at the time, he voted against the Iraq war. Welcome, Senator. Your view of the president's attack on Iran?
Ari, let me tell you, if the American people are bewildered as to what this is all about, they're in good company. It started off by saying we're going to stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Well, I agreed with that years ago and still think that is proper. And then came the second explanation. No, it isn't about that. It's about ballistic missiles. They are developing ballistic missiles that threaten the United States. Then came the whole argument about whether or not we were going to do something to stop them from developing terrorism around the world, an imminent threat to the United States. Today, Secretary of State Rubio put in a fourth idea, and the fourth idea was we did it because Israel was going to attack anyway, and we were going to be vulnerable after that attack. So we have all these rationales, and his president and his administration failing to come to Congress as required by the Constitution to clearly explain to the American people the reason for this war.
Yeah. I want to play some of your colleagues. Take a listen.
I think the president has started a war of choice. There was no imminent threat to the United States.
It posed no imminent threat of attack to the United States. He sought no authorization from Congress.
All of the intelligence I've seen in 13 years on the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committees tell me there was no imminent threat from Iran that justifies sending our sons and daughters into war.
Many of you consisted on this point. There doesn't even seem to be an assertion of an imminent threat by the Trump administration. But there are Trump allies who point to Obama's drone strikes and the basic drift of American power abroad. And they say, like other past presidents, including Democrats, he can do an air war. What do you say to that?
Well, I can tell you it will reach a point where an air war is not enough. Remember that in the explanations of why we went to war, one of them was regime change. They actually used that phrase. That phrase was politically lethal for a long period of time because it was regime change that dragged us into Iraq and made us stay there for year after year and lose all those American lives in the military. So from my point of view, when it comes down to the imminent threat, there is no imminent threat from Iran. Are they bad actors? Yes. Do they need to be contained? Yes. But an imminent threat to the United States to precipitate a war involving many other countries, I never saw it.
When you look at this opposition, what happens? What do you view the purpose and the likely outcome of the congressional vote?
Well, I can just tell you, look at the pattern of voting with the Republican majority and the Trump administration. They never, ever, virtually never defy him on anything. They're scared to death of this president politically. And as a consequence, they nod approval no matter what he's done.
And my final question, less important, but does it matter that the president has not addressed the nation or done any of the normal effort to explain and presumably seek informed support for what is a potential war?
It's a dangerous thing for a president to start a war. It's easier to get into a war than it is to get out. The president needs, and the military deserves, public support for the risks that they're taking, the danger that they're facing because of the president's orders. And if the American public is bewildered as to why we're doing this, it's not a good start.
Senator Durbin, at a busy time on the Hill, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I want to tell folks what's coming up. We've talked a lot. If truth can be one of the first casualties of war, this is a time, especially against an administration that has been caught lying a lot and uses propaganda, has been caught putting up false statements, videos, even at times misleading AI. We want to make sure we touch on that dynamic, the truth and Donald Trump's long history of lies and deceit, in addition to the other war reporting we're doing tonight. President Trump attacking Iran is the opposite of what he claimed he would do. And while some people might say, well, these images are, of course, war, and here we are, and let's move into it, the American public has a right to understand about why we are waging the opposite of what Donald Trump claimed his foreign policy would be in the most recent election where he was elected and promised no forever wars. His campaign promises were against exactly this kind of war of choice in a complex region where America doesn't have an urgent U.S. interest. One report noting that no president in the modern era has ordered more military strikes against as many different countries as Trump. That's in this term alone. Did you know that? Axios noting, as we get into this Iran war, that Trump authorized more individual airstrikes last year than Biden did in 4 years. I want to show you tonight, Trump has now bombed 7 countries in over a year. Iran, Nigeria, Venezuela, of course, where, like Iran, we were a part of an effort that removed the leader, Iraq, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a moment. What you are looking at is unilateral, unbridled American war power under Donald Trump without the Congress. Whether any of these become his so-called forever wars is a matter of risk, something not in our control, because once you start taking out leaders and bombing different places, all sorts of things can happen. This is just in the beginning of the second term alone. The normally MAGA-friendly Wall Street Journal notes Trump spent years denouncing U.S. intervention. Now he's toppling foreign leaders.
I will tell you, you're not going to have a war with me, and you're not going to have a third world war with me. I will also restore peace through strength, and I will prevent World War III from happening. These globalists want to squander all of America's strength, blood, and treasure, chasing monsters and phantoms overseas. Our current strategy of nation building and regime change is a proven absolute failure. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
False. He is starting wars, risking wars, because there are some countries like Venezuela that are in a position where they may or may not fight back. And he said regime change is the goal. He just urged the Iranian people to rise up and change their regime this weekend. Americans are now dying in this war. There are some who might say, oh, it seems quaint to hold a politician or this politician to his words, but that is exactly what we do. And sooner or later in American history, we have seen even powerful, at one time popular presidents, and this one isn't, we've seen people in those positions have it all burn up over the exact thing Donald Trump is doing, thinking that because we have the power and we have the nukes, we can, quote, get away with anything. Indeed, George W. Bush and LBJ found that what started with wide support ended with a kind of ignominy in history for their war failures. It is early days. We are seeing some objections on the right.
It's bad. You know, it's really bad. I was promised that this wouldn't turn into a larger regional conflict. It's hard to believe it. It's hard to believe that at this point.
It's like, why do we do this? Like, why are we helping?
I'm not happy about the whole thing. I don't think this was in America's interest.
He was the No More Endless Wars candidate in 2016 and 2024, particularly, and this looks like an open betrayal of the base.
We're back with foreign policy veteran David Rothkopf. Your thoughts on this hypocrisy?
Well, you've summed it up right. It's not no more wars. It's more wars than anyone else. He has launched attacks on 7 different countries, 8 if you count the troops he's deployed in the United States. That's 8 more countries than he's actually solved wars in. He claims he's the peacemaker president, but he's clearly not. It's the opposite of that, and several of these wars are ongoing at the same time right now. He can't say he's against endless wars because from day one, practically, of entering this administration, he has been fighting wars. This administration thus far has been an endless war. And of course, it's alienating his base, but I would say to the base, stand by, because, you know, for all the reasons that were described by your previous guests in the show, this is an incoherent war undertaken not by choice, but by impulse. And we don't know what's going to happen next. What if the war means prices are going to go up? What if the war means markets will be unstable? What if the war triggers terrorism around the world? What if the war means troops on the ground? What if the war means alienating more of our allies? There are a lot of ways that what we've seen in the past couple of days and throughout the past year could turn real bad for average Americans. And so that's when, you know, the anger or the brewing discontent that you talked about gets turned up a lot of notches. And of course, it's an election year.
How does the U.S. factor this in? Because you want to have maximum runway and leverage without a congressional authorization and public approval. That becomes a real world problem, even if Trump would like to wish it away as an autocrat. There are those today speaking out calling this, quote, disgusting and evil. That's not a AOC. That's a quote from longtime Fox host Tucker Carlson.
Well, it's not often that I come on your show and agree with Tucker Carlson. But, you know, it is disgusting and it is evil. And indeed, it's illegal. It's contrary to the Constitution. There was no imminent threat. It's contrary to the interests of the American people. It's contrary to the interests of our allies. There are already hundreds of civilians who are dead. Many of our friends in the region are hunkering down and in trouble. It is clearly a war that was fought in defense not of the United States, but perhaps of Bibi Netanyahu. And as far as disgusting goes, look, you know the movie Wag the Dog from 1997, a movie that talks about, a fictional president choosing to have a war to distract from domestic problems. I think a lot of people think, and I think for good reason, that Trump is trying to change the subject with this war away from Epstein, away from plummeting poll ratings. And, you know, changing the subject is one thing. Changing the subject by upsetting the entire Middle East, putting world peace at risk, putting hundreds of lives at risk. We're already, I believe 6 members of our military are already dead as a consequence. That is disgusting.
David Rothkopf, speaking clearly, thank you very much. After the break, we turn to tomorrow's election.